Welcome to Night Stories from VHS Era. You've arrived at a place where the glow of old television screens, the hum of rewinding tapes, and the softness of forgotten childhood dreams come alive once more. Each night will take a quiet journey back in time to sleepy suburbs, moonlit driveways, warm summer breezes, and the kind of memories that feel just a little too magical to be real. Here you don't need to worry. Just press play and let the night unfold. Before we begin tonight's story, let's take a moment to slow down. Close your eyes. Take a deep breath in through your nose. Hold it gently. And now, exhale slowly through your mouth. Let the day melt away with that breath. Again, breathe in deeply. Feel your shoulders soften. Now, release and let go of everything you don't need to carry right now. Imagine you're lying on a cozy bed in your childhood room. Outside, the wind hums softly. The light from a small lamp glows like a warm memory, and the sound of a distant VHS tape spinning fills the air with comfort. You are safe. You are still. And the night is yours. Let's begin tonight's story.
Welcome to Night Stories from VHS Era, where the static glow of the past still flickers in the quiet of the night. Tonight, I want to take you back, not just to a place, but to a moment, a memory, a feeling that lived in the air of the 90s. So let me ask you, do you remember the excitement of counting down the days until a family vacation? Do you remember the sound of suitcases zipping shut in the hallway, or the feel of a travel brochure in your hands, its glossy pages filled with castles and coasters and Mickey Mouse smiles? And what about the feeling of waking up before the sun, knowing that this was it, the day had finally arrived? If you remember any of that, or wish you did, then stay with me, because by the end of this video, you'll know exactly how it felt to be a kid in the 90s, about to take the most magical trip of all, the long-awaited journey to Disney World. Not just any trip, the trip, the one we dreamed about for months, sometimes years, the one that lived in our VHS tapes and Burger King Kids Club meal toys, the one that took over dinner conversations and filled the fridge door with magnets shaped like castles and roller coasters torn from a brochure. So stay with me until the end, and I'll tell you exactly how it felt, how we packed, how we planned, and how it all began. The night before we left, the house buzzed in a quiet sort of way. You could hear the dryer spinning, always the last load of clothes that hadn't made it into the suitcase yet. Mom would be at the kitchen table, folding the printed MapQuest directions we printed days before, triple checking them just to make sure. I used to love looking over her shoulder at the squiggly lines of highways and interstates, like a secret treasure map that only grown-ups understood. There was no GPS back then, no apps telling us the fastest way or warning us about traffic ahead, just highlighters, a paper map, and trust. Sometimes Dad even brought a big spiral-bound Rand McNally road atlas with states in bright blue and green and small towns we'd never heard of in tiny black letters. I'd sit in the back seat during the drive and flip through it, pretending to navigate like some junior co-pilot. Did we pack camcorders? Of course we did. Those big shoulder-resting RCA or Sony camcorders that made your arm ache after holding them for 5 minutes. They weren't for recording quick clips. They were for entire moments. Long, winding footage of rest stop breaks, hotel room tours, and family sing-alongs in the car, complete with window glare and VHS grain. Dad would carry it like a news reporter, sometimes narrating our journey in his goofy TV voice. Mom would roll her eyes, but smile every time. And somewhere, deep in a drawer today, those tapes still sit, tiny time capsules waiting to be rewound. Packing was a whole ritual. We didn't have packing cubes or sleek roller bags. We had duffel bags, Samsonite hard cases with broken zippers, and sometimes even a laundry basket full of random things that somehow always made it into the trunk. I always packed my Game Boy, the big gray brick that ate up 4 AA batteries in a day. And I brought my cassette Walkman too, with a pouch of mixtapes and maybe the Space Jam soundtrack or Boys to Men or something from the Now That's What I Call Music series. My sister, she brought her Polly Pockets and a pink Lisa Frank notebook with dolphins on the cover. It smelled faintly like bubblegum and pencil shavings. Did we ever forget anything important? Every single time. Once it was my dad's sunglasses. Another time it was my sister's favorite Beanie Baby. She cried for half a state. But it didn't matter. There was something about the drive or the flight or just going that made everything feel okay. If we were driving, it always started before sunrise. Always. Like it had to be dark when we pulled out of the driveway or it didn't count. The car smelled like coffee and vinyl and the faint tang of sunscreen, even though we wouldn't need it for another 2 days. We had snacks, so many snacks. Dunkaroos, Gushers, fruit roll-ups, Pringles in the red can, and Kool-Aid bursts with the twist-off plastic top. Mom packed sandwiches wrapped in foil too, and juice boxes that leaked condensation into the cooler. And there was music, of course. We had those big black CD wallets zipped up in the glove compartment. Dad always started with the Beach Boys or Jimmy Buffett, as if the soundtrack itself could make the car go faster towards Florida. If we flew, that was a different kind of magic. Airports were louder back then, more chaotic, more exciting. People dressed up a little more. You could walk right up to the gate. No TSA lines, just a printed paper ticket, a flimsy boarding pass that tore too easily, and that unmistakable nervous excitement of finding your gate and waiting. I remember the feeling of sitting by the window and watching planes come and go. I wondered where they were going. Were they going to Disney too? Or to boring places like Indiana or some office trip? I always hoped ours would be the one with Mickey Mouse stickers on the wings. It never was, but the flight always felt like part of the adventure. Sometimes we had those plastic Delta Airlines wings pinned to our shirts. A stewardess gave them to us with a wink and a smile. And I remember thinking, this is it. I'm really going. So you might be wondering, what was it like to plan for a trip like that without smartphones, without apps, without social media countdowns or flight alerts or weather notifications? It was something else, something slower, simpler, more hands-on. You had to call a travel agent or send away for brochures, the kind that came in a fat envelope and smelled like paper and printer ink. I remember spreading them all across the living room floor, flipping through every glossy page and circling what I wanted to see. The Haunted Mansion, Splash Mountain, the monorail, the Epcot ball. That's how we made decisions back then, by circling things, by talking, by dreaming out loud. And maybe that's what I miss the most. Because today, everything is faster, easier. But back then, the waiting was part of the magic, the build-up, the collecting of brochures and packing the camcorder and triple checking the paper map, the early mornings, the mixtapes, the halfway stops at Cracker Barrel or Stuckey's, and the feeling deep in your chest that you were about to be part of something big, something that would stay with you forever. We didn't have to post it, we didn't have to film it for likes, we just lived it. And that, maybe, is what makes those memories shine so brightly now. So yes, I remember the way families prepared for that trip. I remember how it felt to pack for Disney World in the 90s. And I miss it so much. I don't think there are words in any language that can truly explain what it feels like to see the Walt Disney World gates for the first time with your own eyes. You can look at the brochures 100 times. You can circle the pages of that glossy AAA travel guide or stare endlessly at the fold-out map you picked up from a welcome center along I-95. You can even pause your VHS tape on that grainy commercial where a family of 4 waves at the camera from Cinderella's castle. But none of it, absolutely none of it, compares to the real thing. We had just passed a road sign shaped like Mickey's head, a familiar silhouette with black ears stretched against a perfectly blue sky. I remember asking myself, was this it? Were we really that close? And then it happened. We turned onto World Drive. Everything changed. The road suddenly seemed wider. The air smelled sweeter somehow. Palms lined the median, and the signs, oh, those signs. Bright purple and red with that unmistakable Disney typeface. Arrows pointing to Epcot, Magic Kingdom, Typhoon Lagoon. My brother pressed his face so hard against the window that it left a foggy patch on the glass. Mom reminded him to sit back, but none of us could help it. The atmosphere shifted. We weren't just driving anymore. We were entering something bigger than a destination. We were crossing into a story we had only read about or dreamed of. Have you ever seen that iconic Disney World welcome arch? The one that stretches over the road with Mickey on one side and Minnie on the other, and a banner that reads Walt Disney World, where dreams come true. That was it. That was the moment. It came into view so suddenly, so brightly, that all of us gasped at once. I felt my heart beat faster. My dad even slowed down the car, not because of traffic, but because he wanted us to really see it, to take it in, to remember. And I do. I remember the golden castle shape in the middle, the tiny flags on top, and the way the Florida sun made the whole thing sparkle. I remember asking myself, am I really here? Is this real? My hands trembled a little. I looked over at my mom. She was smiling with her eyes. That kind of smile you only see on someone who's quietly remembering their own first time. I think in that second, we were all connected, suspended in that rare and beautiful pause between anticipation and arrival. Dad rolled down the window just slightly. Warm air rushed in, laced with a hint of orange blossom. I think someone was mowing nearby too, because there was this earthy, fresh-cut grass smell under the sweetness. It's funny what the brain chooses to save. That exact scent is forever stored in some hidden drawer in my memory, only unlocked by stories like this. We passed through the gates and cheered like we'd won something, and in a way, we had. I don't think kids today will ever understand what it meant to be there in the 90s. There were no apps to guide us, no smartwatches to buzz us into our FastPass, just a printed booklet and that tiny pocket-sized guide we got from the Welcome Center with hand-drawn illustrations of the rides and schedules. We didn't even know where we were going first. That was the magic of it. We were just going, just being. The first hotel sign we saw was for the All-Star Resorts. My sister squealed and pointed. The letters were huge and playful, like someone had spilled a box of toys and left them there as decoration. Bright yellows and reds and blues, chunky stars and musical notes lining the driveway. We weren't staying there, not yet anyway, but just seeing it felt surreal, like we had walked into a world made just for us. I looked around at the other cars. Most had out-of-state plates, New Jersey, Ohio, Georgia. Some had Disney antenna balls bouncing as they drove. Others had windows scribbled with things like "Honk if you love Goofy" or "First trip to Disney" in colorful window paint. That alone gave me a sense of belonging. We were all strangers, sure, but we were part of something shared, a ritual, a pilgrimage of sorts. How strange and wonderful is it to feel connected to people just because they're on the same adventure. We pulled into the parking lot of the Polynesian Resort just to take a look. Dad said we had a few minutes before check-in at our own place, and he'd heard this one had a good view of the castle from across the lagoon. I remember the tiki torches lit even during the day, the lush plants that framed the entrance, and the way the cast members smiled at us like they already knew we were part of the story. I asked my mom quietly, "Do you think Mickey really lives here?" She smiled and said, "Of course he does. Where else would he live?" It was that kind of magic, where the line between what's real and what's pretend becomes deliciously blurry, where anything, even meeting a mouse in red shorts and yellow shoes, feels entirely possible. Later that afternoon, as we checked into our own hotel, I stood outside on the balcony and looked out toward the sky. It was a watercolor of late-day blues and gentle pinks. I could hear the faint sound of the monorail gliding in the distance.
I'm really here. The words felt sacred. The evening air wrapped around me like a favorite blanket. We didn't even go into the parks yet, but somehow we were already inside the story. The music that played from the lobby speakers stuck in my head as I drifted off that night. It was gentle, orchestral, something I couldn't name, but it felt like home. Do you remember that music? That soft loop that played over and over, reminding you that you had finally made it? By the time my eyes closed, I was still smiling. Not because we had done anything big yet, but because we had arrived. Because we had stepped into magic. Because the gates had opened and we were no longer dreaming from the back seat. We were living it. And that changed everything. We finally walked through the turnstiles of the Magic Kingdom for the very first time and lay eyes on Cinderella Castle rising in the distance. You'll want to hear about how it looked, how it smelled, and how that one moment made us all feel like children again, even the adults.
I woke up to the faint sound of birds chirping and something else, something whimsical and unmistakable. The chime of a Mickey-shaped alarm clock that sat on the nightstand beside me. It was red and black with yellow buttons that looked like Mickey's shoes. The hands glowed faintly in the dark, and when it went off, it played a cheerful jingle that sounded like a Disney parade marching right into your room. That was how mornings began back then, not with smartphones or glowing screens, but with something tangible and fun. You could tap the top of Mickey's head to snooze it, and somehow that made getting up just a little easier. The resort we were staying at was not one of the luxury ones, but it didn't matter. In the 90s, even the value resorts had their own magic. Our room was decorated in bold colors, reds, yellows, blues, with a giant framed print of Mickey and friends hanging over the beds. The carpet had little stars and hidden Mickeys woven into it, and the bedding had playful patterns of Goofy doing handstands and Donald chasing after Pluto. It felt like sleeping in the pages of a cartoon. That first morning was different from waking up anywhere else. The air itself was buzzing with excitement, thick with the smell of syrup from the food court and the faint scent of chlorine from the nearby pool. I could hear the distant hum of luggage wheels being dragged by other families heading to the parks early, the rustle of park maps being folded and unfolded, and the occasional joyful laugh of a kid passing by our door, already wearing mouse ears. There was something deeply comforting about those sounds, like being part of a secret club where everyone shared the same dream. We didn't rush. That was the beauty of staying on property. You could take your time. Dad made us all hot chocolate using the tiny coffee machine in the room, which was a miracle in itself since he usually only drank black coffee. I remember watching him stir it with a plastic stick shaped like a magic wand, something the front desk had given us when we checked in. Mom laid out our clothes, matching Disney t-shirts she had bought at Kmart months earlier, and we each had fanny packs full of quarters, just in case we found an arcade or a pressed penny machine. Breakfast was an event all its own. We walked across the courtyard, past oversized musical instruments and cartoon statues as tall as buildings, to the food court. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of fresh waffles and bacon. The lighting was warm, and the walls were covered in murals of Disney characters enjoying breakfast, just like we were about to. And then he appeared, Goofy, towering, smiling, slightly awkward in that way only Goofy can be. He came right up to our table while we were mid-bite. He didn't say anything, of course, but he gave Dad a high five and then pointed to my brother's waffle, which was perfectly shaped like Mickey Mouse. My brother offered it to him, completely serious, as if it were a peace offering. Goofy laughed silently, shook his head, and then leaned down so we could all take a picture. Not on a phone, on an actual camera, the kind with film. Dad clicked the shutter, and none of us knew if the photo would turn out. We'd have to wait until we got home and develop it. That was part of the magic too, the surprise waiting at the end of the roll. After breakfast, we stopped at the gift shop inside the resort lobby. Every resort had one, and they all smelled the same, like new plastic toys, sunscreen, and something sugary. The shelves were lined with Disney-branded everything: pens, pajamas, autograph books, rain ponchos. But what I remember most clearly were the soaps. Small, oval, and shaped like Mickey's head. They came individually wrapped in clear plastic and sat in a wicker basket by the toiletries. I must have grabbed 3 of them and tucked them into my suitcase like they were priceless treasures. Mom said they were meant to be used, but I had no intention of ever opening them. To this day, I still have one, slightly yellowed with age, stored in a little tin box. Walking back to the room after breakfast felt like returning to a temporary home. That was something no other vacation had ever given us before. You didn't just stay at a hotel at Disney, you lived inside the story. The sidewalks had musical notes embedded in them. The trash cans were themed. Even the signs for laundry facilities had Mickey's gloves pointing the way. Everything, and I mean everything, had been touched by magic. There was a pool shaped like a giant piano just around the corner from our room. We didn't swim that morning, but we watched as other kids splashed and shouted while Disney songs played softly through hidden speakers. No one argued, no one fought. It was as if being there made everything lighter. Even my parents, who had spent months saving and planning and worrying, seemed younger somehow. Dad joked more. Mom hummed while brushing her hair. There was an ease that you only find when you're somewhere that invites you to leave real life behind.
Later that day, when we returned from the parks, the room had been tidied by mousekeeping. That's what the little card on the dresser called it, mousekeeping. They had shaped the towels into swans, placed them by the pillows, and even lined up our souvenir plush toys in a neat little row as if they had been waiting for us to come home. I remember thinking that someone had done that just to make us smile, and it worked. It absolutely worked. We spent that evening wandering the resort, not in a rush, not on a mission, just walking. We watched fireworks from a distance, our necks craned toward the night sky as colors burst above the trees. A few other families had gathered outside too, their kids in pajamas, their parents holding cameras with glowing red lights. I don't know any of their names, but for that brief moment, we were all together in something bigger than ourselves. That night, as I lay in bed with the curtains pulled open to reveal the starry sky above, I felt something I hadn't expected: peace. Pure, uninterrupted peace. It wasn't just the joy of rides or characters, it was the feeling of being surrounded by wonder, of being seen, of being welcomed. That's what staying at a Disney resort in the 90s did to you. It wrapped you up in a story where you weren't just watching from the outside, you were a part of it. And the best part was knowing that the story wasn't over. Tomorrow would bring more magic, more waffles, more characters, more memories that would settle into your bones and stay with you long after the vacation ended. That is something you never forget. The sun had just begun to sink behind the tree line when the music started echoing down Main Street, USA. That moment is carved in my memory like a favorite bedtime story. One minute, we were licking the last streaks of pink and blue cotton candy from our fingers, our feet sore from hours of walking and standing in lines, and the next, the entire street transformed into something unreal. The lights dimmed. Not just any dimming, but a calculated softening that felt theatrical. The sky turned that purple-orange hue that only seems to exist at Disney, where daylight ends, but the magic hasn't let go yet. We had heard whispers about it all day. Other guests talked about it in line. Cast members reminded us to grab our spots early. Spectral magic is tonight, someone said with a kind of reverence, like it was a once-in-a-lifetime event. In the 90s, there was something about the name itself, spectral magic. It sounded futuristic and old world all at once. Not just a parade, but a spell being cast over the park.
a promise that what we were about to see would defy the laws of reality. We staked out a spot right in front of the Emporium, spreading out a thin towel we had brought just for this. My brother and I sat cross-legged on the sidewalk while Mom handed us little glowing toys she had bought from a vendor. Mine was a spinning Mickey wand with fiber optic threads that lit up in red and green. My brother's was a Buzz Lightyear spinner that flashed white-blue and made a faint whirring sound when you pressed the button. We must have pressed those buttons 100 times while waiting. And then it began. From somewhere in the distance came a whisper of chimes, faint at first. Then a deep male voice, poetic and haunting, filled the air, announcing the arrival of the Spectral Magic Parade. The music swelled, a blend of orchestral wonder and 90s synth, and suddenly the parade emerged from the shadows like something born from dreams. The floats glowed from within, not just lit, but alive. Lights rippled and pulsed, shifting colors, transforming right before our eyes. First came Mickey as the host, riding a glowing chariot that looked like a constellation. His robes sparkled like the night sky, and his smile could have lit up the entire street. Following him were floats that blurred the line between machinery and fantasy. A giant dragon that breathed colored smoke, Cinderella's pumpkin coach with glittering vines, Ariel swimming through fiber optic waves. The air was filled with that electric buzz of 1,000 gasps and cheers all around me. It was as if the entire crowd was breathing in sync, in awe as one. Characters danced beside the floats, their costumes embedded with tiny lights. Snow White waved at us, her dress shimmering with each movement. Goofy spun in circles, his hat blinking like a beacon. The 7 dwarfs marched by, singing along to their own light-infused soundtrack. And then there were moments when everything slowed, as if time stretched just enough for you to fully take it in. Belle passed by in a golden gown that glowed from beneath. She looked directly at me and waved. For years, I told everyone about that moment. I believed with every part of me that Belle had waved only to me. And the music? Oh, the music. It wasn't just in the background. It wrapped around you, climbed into your chest, and made your heart thump in rhythm with the lights. There were melodies I still hum to this day without realizing it. That emotional crescendo when the floats circled back one final time. The goodbye theme, softer now, more delicate, as if tucking the magic away for safekeeping until tomorrow. After the parade passed, the street remained quiet, hushed, like everyone was processing what they just witnessed. But the silence didn't last long. Almost as if on cue, the voice of Walt Disney himself echoed through hidden speakers. That familiar recording, his dedication speech, the one that starts with, "To all who come to this happy place, welcome," played as the lights on the castle began to twinkle. The air shifted, and we all knew what was coming next. Fantasy in the sky. The first fireworks shot up with a high-pitched whistle and burst into a bloom of gold. It was followed by red, green, and then a sparkle of silver that looked like stardust raining down over Cinderella Castle. Each explosion echoed in your chest. It was loud, but never too loud, like the sound had been engineered for delight rather than shock. The castle stood as a glowing silhouette against the sky, and in that moment, it didn't feel like a building. It felt alive, regal, mythical. I remember tilting my head back so far I thought it might fall off. The fireworks didn't just stay above the castle. They danced across the entire horizon. They swooped and zigzagged and popped like the sky itself was celebrating. The music swelled once more, classic Disney themes woven into a breathtaking score. The sound of "When You Wish Upon a Star" wrapped around me like a lullaby, and I felt tears sting the corners of my eyes, not from sadness, from joy so pure, so unfiltered, it overflowed. Next to me, Mom squeezed my hand. I looked over and saw tears in her eyes too. Dad had his arm around my brother, who was still spinning his buzz toy absent-mindedly, completely mesmerized. For that 15-minute window, there was no such thing as the outside world. No homework, no bills, no bad news. Only lights, music, dreams, and the wonder of believing anything was possible. When the final firework exploded into a giant golden Mickey head, yes, they really did that. The crowd roared, not just clapped, but erupted. People cheered like their favorite team had just won the championship. Strangers hugged, kids danced, parents laughed with tears on their cheeks. And all around us, cast members in clean uniforms smiled as if they had orchestrated the entire night just for us. We lingered long after the last spark faded. The park didn't rush anyone out. The background music returned softly, and the lights on Main Street came back up, warmer now, calmer. We made our way slowly to the exit, clutching souvenirs and empty snack bags, surrounded by thousands of people who all somehow felt like family. Back at the resort, while brushing my teeth and wiping glitter off my cheeks, I looked at myself in the mirror. I was sunburned, tired, and sticky from sweets, and I had never felt more alive. That night, lying in bed, I closed my eyes and could still see it all. The glowing floats, the spinning lights, the fireworks echoing like heartbeats. Magic had stepped out of the television screen and become real, and I had been there to witness it. That kind of awe never really leaves you. It imprints itself somewhere deep, like a melody you only hear when the world gets quiet enough. Spectral magic and fantasy in the sky weren't just entertainment, they were communion. A reminder that no matter how old you get or how far life pulls you from that sidewalk on Main Street, wonder is never truly out of reach. Long before smartphones became extensions of our hands, and before virtual lines replaced physical cues, there was a kind of beauty in simply standing and waiting. That feeling of anticipation, that subtle anxiety in your chest as the line curved around the corner, and you weren't quite sure how close you were to the front. But you didn't care. You had a crumpled park map in your pocket, a Mickey bar in one hand, and the absolute certainty that what waited for you on the other side of that rope or turnstile was going to change your world for 8 minutes or less. That was how it felt in the 90s when we still had access to the lost legends of Walt Disney World. One of my earliest thrill memories is tied to Mr. Toad's Wild Ride. The moment we stepped into the queue, it was like falling headfirst into a surreal British storybook. There was something offbeat and even slightly chaotic about it. Not scary exactly, but unpredictable. The building itself didn't look like the other rides in Fantasyland. It had this eccentric, Tudor-style charm that gave off the energy of a place where strange things were bound to happen. And once you climbed into that motor car, the kind that looked like it belonged in a cartoon version of 1920s London, everything became a blur of twisting tracks, bright painted flats, and deliberate confusion. I remember gripping the side of the car while my brother squealed next to me. The ride didn't make sense in the best way. You didn't follow a traditional story arc. You crashed through rooms, careened past wild animals, collided with law books and judges, and then, unexpectedly, ended up in hell. Yes, actual hell, with demons and flames and heat. For a kid raised on wholesome Saturday morning cartoons, it was jarring in a thrilling way. A strange blend of dark comedy and innocent mischief. And even now, as I walk past where the ride once stood, I feel a quiet emptiness. The kind you get when you revisit a childhood home and find someone else's curtains in the windows. Then there was 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. That ride wasn't just an attraction, it was an expedition. The lagoon sparkled under the Florida sun, and the submarines, those long, sleek, riveted beauties, looked like they belonged in some vintage sci-fi adventure. Boarding one felt like crossing over into a different timeline. You descended into the belly of the beast, ducking your head through a tight hatchway and sitting on tiny stools beside circular portholes. The voice of the captain crackled through the speakers, calm and authoritative, setting the stage for what felt like a genuine voyage beneath the sea. Of course, we weren't really underwater. But try telling that to a wide-eyed child staring at simulated fish floating past glowing coral reefs. The bubbles rising against the glass, the eerie green glow, the mechanical squid and sunken ships, all of it was believable in the way only Disney could manage. I can still feel the press of my forehead against that cold glass, can still hear the clinks and whirs of the submarine's imaginary engine. That attraction had gravity. It wasn't just a ride, it was a journey. And the older I get, the more I realize how rare that feeling has become. And how could I forget the original Star Tours? Before it became part of a galaxy-wide immersive experience with multiple endings and timeline branches, it was something simpler and perhaps even more daring. The 90s version had you board a battered-looking Star Speeder 3000. It was piloted by a jittery blue and silver droid named Rex, who clearly had no idea what he was doing. That's what made it so fun. The fact that we were in the hands of a panicked, slightly malfunctioning robot somehow made the whole experience feel more alive. The line for Star Tours felt like walking into a piece of the future. The spaceport was filled with beeping monitors, moving droids, and luggage scanners that seemed to peek into intergalactic suitcases. As you climbed aboard and fastened your belt, there was no fancy 3D or high-resolution graphics. It was shaky, grainy, and utterly exhilarating. The moment the Star Speeder lurched into hyperspace, the entire cabin shook, and my stomach flipped in the best way. We zipped through asteroids, dodged enemy ships, and even made a clumsy crash landing, all under Rex's nervous narration. When they eventually updated the ride, adding new planets and smoother technology, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of nostalgia for the older version. Maybe it was Rex's awkward charm. Maybe it was the thrill of not knowing what would go wrong next. Or maybe it was because at the time, it was the closest I would ever get to flying through space. A kid didn't need realistic graphics, just movement, sound, and the imagination that maybe, just maybe, you were really out there, lost among the stars.
There were others too. Rides and shows that have since been changed, removed, or reimagined beyond recognition. The Skyway that took you from Tomorrowland to Fantasyland and gave you a bird's eye view of the park. Body Wars and Epcot's now defunct Wonders of Life Pavilion, where you were shrunk down and injected into the human body. Horizons, where you could choose your own ending. Underwater cities, space colonies, desert futures, and each one felt like a glimpse into the potential of a hopeful tomorrow. Those attractions didn't just entertain, they inspired. They fired up imaginations and made us feel like explorers, inventors, and adventurers, even if we were still too small to ride Space Mountain. They taught us to expect the unexpected, to embrace whimsy, and to believe in places that couldn't possibly exist, and yet somehow did. Places where motor cars crashed through courtroom walls, where submarines dove to the ocean floor, and where ordinary tourists became accidental heroes in faraway galaxies. I still dream about those rides. Not every night, but often enough that I know they left a permanent imprint. The way you might dream of a playground that no longer stands, or a treehouse long since reclaimed by nature. They're places we visited not just with our bodies, but with our hearts wide open. Places that ask nothing of us except to believe for just a little while. The parks have changed. Of course they have. They've evolved with new technology, new franchises, new generations. But tucked away in the corners of my memory, and in the memories of so many who came of age in that magical decade, are the ghosts of those glorious 90s attractions. Not scary ghosts, glowing ones, flickering with joy, whispering to us to remember what it felt like to climb aboard a submarine or a spaceship or a wild motor car and not care about logic or realism, only about the feeling of being transported. And isn't that what real magic is? There's a certain kind of magic that doesn't come from fireworks or animatronics or even rides. It comes from a handshake, a hug, and the faint scent of sunscreen and cotton candy clinging to a costume. In the Disney world of the 90s, nothing compared to the moment you found yourself face to face with a living cartoon. Not on a screen, not in a book, but right there, right in front of you. Bigger than life and somehow more real than you ever imagined.
I still remember the weight of the autograph book in my hand. Its corners were slightly curled from the Florida humidity, and the pages were decorated with pastel borders and faint outlines of famous Disney faces. On the inside cover, my name was written in large block letters, probably by my mom, along with our hotel room number just in case I lost it, which I nearly did, several times. But that little book was my most prized possession during those trips, because that was where the magic became tangible. You didn't just meet characters, you collected them. The joy of spotting Mickey from across the park was something electric. You could be halfway through a snack or trudging between rides, and suddenly someone would shout, "Look, there's Mickey!" And everything else would stop. Time, conversations, the ache in your legs, none of it mattered anymore. You ran, dodging strollers and snack carts, clutching your autograph book to your chest like it held national secrets. Because there he was, the mouse, smiling, waving, surrounded by kids and cameras and cast members gently managing the crowd. And yet, somehow, when it was your turn, it felt like he had been waiting just for you. The costumes were huge. Mickey's head seemed impossibly round. His hands were gloved and oversized, and he didn't speak. But he didn't need to. His movements said everything. A tilt of the head, a dramatic hand over the heart, an exaggerated hug, they communicated warmth and playfulness without a single word. And when he took my book and signed it with his signature big looping letters, I felt like I was being officially welcomed into his world. Some characters were easier to find. You could catch Goofy near Main Street, always doing something, well, goofy. He liked to trip over his own feet, pat heads, or pretend to eat someone's hat. He had this wonderful way of engaging the whole group at once, not just the kids, but the adults too. You could hear genuine laughter ripple through the crowd whenever he was nearby. My dad once got pulled into a photo with him completely against his will, and the look of surprise frozen on his face as Goofy flung an arm around him remains one of our most treasured family photos. Others felt more elusive. Characters like Donald or Chip and Dale seemed to appear out of nowhere and disappeared just as quickly, often with a trail of kids chasing behind them like a parade. And then there were the princesses, graceful, regal, and a little intimidating when you were a shy kid in a stained t-shirt and mismatched shorts. But even they had a way of making you feel royalty. Belle once knelt beside me and asked if I liked to read. I nodded, too starstruck to speak, and she told me books were the best kind of adventure. I think that moment did more to encourage my love of stories than any school lesson ever could. The autographs themselves were a kind of art. They weren't just signatures, they were performances. Mickey's was bold and friendly. Minnie dotted her I with a heart. Donald wrote in jagged capital letters, always a bit rushed. Goofy's was long and looping, tilted to one side, like he'd signed it while leaning upside down. I loved watching them write, the way they handled the fat pens with their oversized hands, often needing both mitts just to hold it steady. Sometimes they'd mess up and scribble a new one on the next page, shaking their heads or dramatically slapping their foreheads in mock embarrassment. I kept that autograph book like it was sacred. Each signature was a little victory, a reminder that I had met someone special, someone I had seen in movies or TV or picture books, and now had the proof, the ink on paper, that they were real. I would flip through the pages at night in our hotel room, tracing the letters with my fingers, reliving each encounter like replaying my own private movie. Meeting characters wasn't just about photos or autographs. It was about being seen, being acknowledged. As a kid, the world often felt too big, too loud, too fast. But in those few seconds with Mickey or Pluto or Cinderella, the spotlight turned to you. You weren't just part of the crowd, you were the moment. You mattered. And somehow, those characters knew exactly how to make each child feel that way.
There was also an element of the hunt. Before the days of mobile apps and live wait time tracking, finding characters was like a treasure hunt. You wandered, asked cast members, followed your instincts, or relied on luck. Sometimes you stumbled into a meet and greet area just as the characters were coming out. Other times you missed them by a minute, left to peer down the path where they had just walked, hoping they might turn around. That unpredictability added to the thrill. You never knew who you might find around the next corner. And sometimes, just sometimes, they came to you. Like at certain restaurants where characters roams between tables. I remember Goofy trying to steal my waffle at breakfast, and Minnie adjusting my hat like a worried ant. Those moments felt so natural, so unrehearsed. It was as if the characters had genuinely decided to check in on us, not as part of a scheduled meet, but just because they cared. The characters never spoke, but they always listened. They listened with their body language, their gestures, their warmth. If you were sad, they noticed. If you were shy, they knelt down to your level. If you were scared, they gave you space and then slowly invited you in. It was a kind of emotional intelligence that most adults could learn from. They didn't just entertain, they connected. Today, the parks have become more efficient, more curated. Lines are managed with apps. Autographs are sometimes pre-signed cards. And while the characters still exist, still hug, still wave, and swirl and pose, there was something raw and unscripted about how it felt in the 90s. The characters then weren't just part of the show. They were the magic. They were the dream come alive. And when I flipped through that old, faded autograph book, the one I somehow never lost despite nearly leaving it behind on at least 3 different benches, I'm right back there. A kid in sneakers too big for her feet, clutching a pen nearly the size of her forearm, waiting for Goofy to scribble his name and maybe, just maybe, pretend to steal my hat. Those were the moments that didn't need rides or tickets or even words. Just a hug, a smile, and a signature that said, "You were here and I saw you."
Money didn't feel real inside Walt Disney World, not in the 90s. It wasn't just about the spending. It was about the magic of the currency itself. Because at Disney, you didn't just use dollars. You used Disney dollars. Actual bills printed with Mickey, Minnie, or Goofy, adorned in colorful ink with shimmering accents that made them feel like pirate treasure or something out of a fairy tale. You could use them just like regular money in the parks and hotels, but most of us didn't. We hoarded them, protected them, slipped them carefully into envelopes or the front of autograph books, knowing full well we'd never spend them. They were too beautiful to give away. I remember the first time I was handed a Disney dollar. It felt like I was being entrusted with a secret currency that only worked in the most magical place on earth. I couldn't stop staring at it. The weight of the paper, the cartoon face smiling back at me. Even my parents treated them with a kind of reverence. They would exchange real money for Disney dollars at the hotel front desk, mostly for fun, and hand them to us kids like prizes. Here you go, spend it on something special. But of course, I didn't. I tucked mine safely in my backpack next to my autograph book, certain it would be worth millions someday. It was priceless to me even then. Then there were the shops. Oh, the shops. From the moment you stepped foot inside the gates, you were surrounded by temptation. Plushies hanging from ceilings, walls lined with colorful hats, racks of t-shirts featuring characters in every pose imaginable. Souvenirs glimmered under perfect lighting, their packaging designed to tug at your heart and your wallet all at once. But it wasn't just about wanting to buy things. It was about capturing pieces of the experience, small tokens that let you take a piece of Disney home. There was a particular kind of frenzy that took over in those stores. Kids wandered wide-eyed with sticky fingers from melting ice cream. Parents negotiated with tired expressions and crumpled dollar bills. I was no different. I wanted everything. The VHS tapes in bright plastic cases with gold foil lettering. The holographic stickers that shimmered when you tilted them in the light. The autograph books in 100 styles. The bubble wands that leaked in your suitcase but made you the coolest kid on Main Street. And then there were the plushies. Entire walls of them. Rows of Mickey, Minnie, Goofy, Pluto, and even more obscure characters like Figment or Brer Rabbit. Each had slightly different stitching or fabric. Some had themed costumes, others wore hats or held tiny props. I once spent 45 minutes debating between a small Daisy Duck with glitter on her shoes and a larger Eeyore that drooped just like in the movie.
I chose the Eeyore. I still have him. The process of shopping was as much a part of the Disney experience as the rides. You'd go on Pirates of the Caribbean and exit straight into a pirate-themed store with swords and eye patches and gold coin pouches. You'd ride Space Mountain and end up in a glow-in-the-dark sci-fi gift shop that sold alien-shaped candy and metallic keychains. Disney knew what it was doing, and I didn't mind. I loved it. Shopping at Disney wasn't just consumerism. It was celebration of being there, of feeling something real. But the true treasure, the thing every 90s kid remembers, isn't even what you bought. It's what you carried it home in. The crinkly plastic shopping bags with the glossy blue background and bold silver Disney logo. They were sturdy, beautiful, and almost sacred. You didn't throw them away. You folded them carefully and took them home like souvenirs of their own. Some kids used them for lunch bags at school. Others stored toys or tucked them under their pillows like a memory you could touch. I still have one of those bags, folded and tucked inside a photo album. It smells faintly of old paper and childhood, the kind of thing that could bring tears to your eyes with a single rustle. There was also something oddly thrilling about holding one of those bags as you walked through the parks. It meant you had chosen something to remember this trip by, something that would live on after the fireworks ended and the suitcases were packed. You'd see others with their bags too, and you'd smile in silent camaraderie. You were all collectors of joy. One trip, I remember saving up all my allowance just to buy a set of holographic postcards. They changed images when you tilted them, showing characters dancing or fireworks exploding. I kept them in the front pocket of my backpack and guarded them like treasures. I didn't send a single one. They were too precious. I still have those postcards too, nestled next to old ticket stubs and faded Polaroids. Another year, I became obsessed with the plastic souvenir cups that came with meals. They had bendy straws and screw-on lids and characters printed all around. I must have brought 5 of them home. They didn't even fit in our suitcase, so I carried 2 on the plane like priceless works of art. I drank from those cups for years, long after the print faded and the lids cracked. Because they weren't just cups, they were reminders, time capsules in plastic form. Even the most mundane items became magical when they came from Disney. Pens with characters on the cap, notepads shaped like Mickey, little soaps molded like ears. They all felt enchanted, like they'd been blessed by pixie dust. As a kid, I didn't know what branding or marketing was. All I knew was that everything Disney touched became part of the story. Looking back now, I realize it wasn't about the things themselves. It was about how they made me feel. Each souvenir was a bookmark in the story of our trip, a tangible reminder of a moment, a ride, a laugh, a hug. They were vessels for emotion, for nostalgia, for memory. Sometimes I wonder what future generations will collect. Digital photos, QR codes, online reservations. But we had Disney dollars and shopping bags and worn-out plushies. We had stickers on our lunchboxes and VHS tapes lined up on shelves. We had something we could hold in our hands. Even now, when I open that old box of souvenirs, I'm transported. I can feel the air conditioning from the Emporium, hear the beeping of the registers, smell the mix of popcorn and bubblegum. I'm a kid again, standing in line with sweaty hands and a heart full of wonder, ready to hand over my Disney dollar for something unforgettable. And that bag, that glorious crinkly bag, it's still there, waiting, just like the magic. You could always smell it before you saw it. The buttery, slightly sweet scent of popcorn, the hint of sugar from cotton candy swirling somewhere in the distance, the unmistakable tang of something grilled and glorious being sold from a cart around the next corner. Food at Walt Disney World in the 90s wasn't just about satisfying hunger. It was an essential part of the magic, a flavor-based memory stitched into the very fabric of the experience. As a kid, food was never just food. A Mickey-shaped ice cream bar wasn't just dessert. It was a ritual. It always began the same way, tearing open the wrapper slowly, revealing that perfect chocolate-dipped silhouette of ears and smiling mouths. The Florida heat meant you had maybe 3 minutes before it started to melt. 2 if you were standing in direct sun. 1 if you were excited and kept talking between bites. The chocolate would crack as your teeth hit it, giving way to that vanilla center, cold and soft and creamy. It never tasted the same outside of Disney. I know because we tried to buy a version at home once. It wasn't the same. It lacked the context. It lacked the wonder. I vividly remember sitting on the curb outside Cinderella Castle, legs stretched in front of me, holding my ice cream with both hands, as if it might float away. Around me, kids laughed, parents snapped photos, and a Dapper Dan quartet sang in the distance. But I was in my own little world, savoring each bite like it was a secret. The Mickey bar always melted faster than you wanted it to. The ears were gone in seconds. But for a few precious minutes, you held something perfect in your hand. And then there were the turkey legs, those legendary, comically oversized hunks of meat that you could smell from across Frontierland. I had seen other people eating them long before I had the courage to try one myself. Adults mostly. The size alone was intimidating. It looked like something pulled from a medieval feast. But one day, I got brave. I remember holding it awkwardly with both hands, unsure where to start. The first bite surprised me. Smoky, salty, juicy. It tasted primal, like a dragon's feast, like something out of a storybook. It dripped down my fingers and stained the napkins. I wore the scent for hours, and I didn't care, because that turkey leg was mine, and I was in Disney, and nothing else mattered. One of the most underrated food experiences was the neon slushies from Tomorrowland. They came in strange colors: electric blue, radioactive green, shockwave purple, and were served in clear plastic cups that fogged with condensation. The flavors didn't correspond to anything real: blue raspberry, cosmic citrus, galactic grape. But they were cold and sweet and wildly satisfying, especially after waiting in line for Space Mountain. I'd press the cup against my face to cool off, sipping slowly through a giant straw as we walked under the white geometric awnings of the future. The slushies dyed your tongue for hours. That was part of the fun. Eating in Disney wasn't always about walking food, though. Some of the best memories came from sitting down inside one of the themed restaurants that only existed in the 90s. One of my favorites was the Sci-Fi Dine-In Theater at Disney MGM Studios. You sat in classic car booths facing a big screen playing cheesy black and white horror trailers from the 50s. The lights were low, stars sparkled above you, and servers wore retro uniforms. I felt like I had stepped into another world. The burgers were thick, the fries salty, and the milkshakes came in tall, frosted glasses. But more than that, it was the feeling, like I was part of something timeless. Then there was the 50s Primetime Cafe, where waitresses scolded you for putting elbows on the table and called you sweetie in a voice that felt straight out of an old sitcom. The tables looked like your grandma's kitchen, complete with pastel patterns and vintage TVs playing reruns. They served meatloaf and pot roast and green beans, and if you didn't finish your plate, you'd get a lecture. I once tried to hide my vegetables under my napkin. The waitress caught me. She held it up like a trophy and announced my crime to the whole room. Everyone laughed, including me. Character dining was its own kind of adventure. Whether it was Chef Mickey's or breakfast at the Crystal Palace, there was something surreal about trying to eat pancakes while Tigger bounced behind you. I remember Goofy once poured syrup on my waffles for me. I was too shy to speak, just giggled behind my glass of orange juice. The food at those breakfasts wasn't gourmet, but it was comforting. Scrambled eggs, Mickey waffles, sausage links, fruit that somehow tasted fresher than anywhere else. And of course, endless hot chocolate. It came in mugs with steam curling out like magic smoke. There were snacks you could only get in certain areas too. In Adventureland, the Dole Whip reigned supreme. Pineapple soft serve that felt like a tropical breeze in dessert form. In Liberty Square, there were funnel cakes dusted with powdered sugar that clung to your clothes and cheeks. In Epcot, you could travel the world through food. Germany had pretzels the size of your head. Japan had sweet rice crackers in brightly colored bags. Mexico offered churros that were crisp on the outside and soft inside, rolled in cinnamon sugar and gone in 2 bites. But one of my favorite little spots was tucked away near the back of Fantasyland. It was a small snack stand that sold hot pretzels and cheddar cheese cups. The pretzels were shaped like Mickey's face, of course. I would dip one ear into the cheese, then the other, then go back for the nose. It became a game. I'd sit on a shaded bench watching ducks waddle near the moat, pretending I was part of the castle staff on break from royal duties. That cheese dip probably came out of a can, but in my mind, it was liquid gold. There was also something about the packaging. Disney food came wrapped in napkins and containers that made everything feel official. Ice cream cones were served in wrappers with little Mickeys printed on them. Popcorn came in striped cardboard buckets that doubled as hats when they were empty. Even the plastic forks had character engravings. Every detail was intentional, and I noticed. We all did. After a long day of walking, eating something familiar gave you energy, gave you comfort. You'd settle in on a bench or find a table in a shady spot, unwrap your snack, and just breathe for a moment. The sounds of laughter, music, stroller wheels rolling by, and monorail chimes all melted together into a lullaby of vacation. Food wasn't just sustenance, it was part of the story, a flavor that anchored the feeling. Even now, I can taste certain things just by closing my eyes. The cold rush of blue slushy on a hot day, the first bite of a Mickey pretzel in the shade of Cinderella Castle, the syrup-drenched waffles with ears slightly uneven. I can feel the heat of the turkey legs seeping through the foil, the sticky fingers from cotton candy, the chocolate crumbs on my shirt from a half-melted Mickey bar. It wasn't gourmet dining. It didn't need to be. It was food that tasted like joy. Food that wrapped around a memory and held on for dear life. Food that belonged to a time when life was simpler, when vacations felt endless, and when every bite tasted like magic. Before smartphones, before apps told you wait times to the second, before notifications buzzed with lightning lane alerts or mobile order updates, there was just you, your family, a paper map, and a whole lot of anticipation. And somehow, in the quiet slowness of it all, the magic didn't feel any smaller. It felt bigger. The act of waiting, of wandering, of flipping open that creased, glossy map under the Florida sun was part of the experience. It was a different kind of wonder, a slower kind, a more human one. Every morning, right after walking through the turnstiles, someone would hand us a colorful tri-folded guide. It always had a bold character on the front, maybe Mickey with a camera or Goofy riding a roller coaster, and listed the park hours, parade times, show schedules, and restaurant locations inside. You'd open it and the sense of fresh ink and waxy paper hit you. One side was the schedule, the other a detailed, illustrated map of the park. It wasn't interactive, it didn't update in real time, but it was beautiful, whimsical, and something you could hold in your hand. I used to stare at those maps like they were treasure scrolls, tracing our route with my finger while imagining how long it might take to get from Frontierland to Tomorrowland. Lines were long, sure, but we didn't mind as much. Waiting was expected, part of the rhythm of the day. You braced for it, you prepared. Parents packed snacks, kids played games. Some families used the time to plan their next ride or just take in the scenery. I remember standing in line for Splash Mountain, slowly winding through that wooden queue full of Brer Rabbit lore, and listening to the faint banjo music overhead. The line wrapped through shaded trees, past signs painted in Southern slang. It wasn't just a wait, it was an immersion. We used to play I Spy to pass the time. My brother and I would scan the crowd, the decorations, even each other. I spy with my little eye something red. A balloon, a cast member's hat, a pair of mini ears. Sometimes we brought tiny coloring books or word searches. Sometimes we just people watched. I was fascinated by all the different families, the matching t-shirts, the languages being spoken, the way kids my age carried autograph books or stuffed animals clutched to their chests. Even the stroller traffic became something to observe and giggle about. Then there were the moments when you got to the front and realized you had no idea how long you'd been waiting. Time felt different in line. You were inching forward slowly, yes, but your mind was always dreaming forward, imagining the ride ahead. What would it feel like? Would the ghosts in the haunted mansion really follow you home? Would the stars inside Space Mountain look like the real thing? It was anticipation wrapped in patience, and it was beautiful. And of course, there was FastPass, not the kind you tapped on your phone, the real one, the kiosk kind. You had to physically walk to the ride, find the special machines near the entrance, and insert your park ticket. The machine would whir and then spit out a paper FastPass slip, stamped with your return window. Sometimes you'd get a time just an hour away. Other times it was late afternoon, and you had to plan your entire day around that one little rectangle of paper. We kept them in our fanny packs or front pockets like secret VIP passes. Holding a stack of them made you feel like royalty. There was a certain satisfaction in the strategy of it all. Dad would send us ahead to grab fast passes for Big Thunder Mountain while Mom stayed with my sister near the carousel. We'd reconvene at a bench and huddle around the map like explorers charting a course. There were no alerts, no GPS, just timing, footwork, and a shared sense of mission. You walked more, you guessed more, you discovered more by accident, and sometimes those detours became the best part. The maps themselves became souvenirs. I had a drawer at home full of them, folded and wrinkled, ink slightly smudged from sweaty fingers. I kept them because they felt important. They were physical proof of the day's adventure. You could trace your steps, see which lands you skipped, remember that one moment when you saw the dragon under the castle or when you ate popcorn during the parade. The tactile world of waiting in line also meant more connection. You talked to your family, you shared jokes, you sang quietly. Sometimes other families next to you would join in. Conversations would spark over shared sunscreen woes or excited chatter about which rides to hit next. Once, we stood next to a couple on their honeymoon. They told us how they'd come here as kids separately, never knowing each other existed. But now they were back together. That line to Pirates of the Caribbean felt like a storybook.
I remember holding that map in both hands, sometimes folding it and refolding it just to pass the time. The way the sunlight would shine through its glossy pages, how the ink would blur if your hand was sweaty, the little icons that marked the rides, a lightning bolt for thrill rides, a star for something magical, a spoon and fork for dining spots. You had to learn to read it, to orient yourself. And when you got lost, and we did often, it wasn't a problem. It was an opportunity, a chance to stumble onto a ride you hadn't planned for, to discover a hidden Mickey, to get wet by a surprise fountain and laugh so hard you forgot where you were supposed to be going. Waiting in line taught patience. It built anticipation. It slowed you down just enough to notice things. A squirrel running across a path, a kid dressed as Peter Pan twirling in circles, the smell of churros drifting by, the way the pavement changed between lands. Without phones, we looked up more. We lived in the space we occupied. We were present. Even now, years later, I sometimes find myself nostalgic for those lines, for the maps, for the uncertainty, for the feeling of unfolding a piece of paper and choosing a direction, not because an app told me to, but because it felt right, because that's where the adventure lived. In that world, every step was a decision, every turn a new story, and every line, no matter how long, was simply another place where the magic could find you. The morning we left Disney always felt like waking up from a dream too early. The air in the hotel room was somehow heavier. The magic hadn't vanished, but it felt like it was retreating, slowly slipping out of reach. Mickey no longer waved from the television screen as we packed our suitcases. The clothes that once smelled like cotton candy and sunscreen were now folded neatly and zipped into bags, their color dulled by the promise of school, routine, and everything we had tried to escape.
It was a quiet sadness, the kind only children fully feel but can't quite name. I remember that last breakfast vividly. The resort food court was still bustling, but something had changed in our perception. The music was the same, the smell of waffles and maple syrup still warm, but we were already half gone. You'd look around and see other families dragging wheeled suitcases, trading magic bands for car keys. Even the cast members seemed to speak in softer tones, knowing full well that today was a goodbye for many. We tried to stretch time. One last chocolate milk, one final peek into the gift shop, but everything had a countdown attached. The ride back home was always long, no matter the distance. Whether it was a 2-hour flight or a full day of driving, it felt like the opposite of the arrival. There was no excited chatter, no flipping through park maps or guessing what the castle would look like. This was the slow exhale after a week of holding your breath. The car was quieter. The suitcases filled with souvenirs and damp swimsuits sat silently in the trunk. Occasionally, someone would say, "I wish we were still there," and the rest of us would nod without answering because we were all thinking the same thing. But back home, the real ritual began. As soon as we walked in the door, before unpacking, before the laundry, before even finishing dinner, the VHS tape came out. That black plastic rectangle held more than just footage. It was our portal back to a place that already felt like a dream. Dad had carried the camcorder everywhere, through Main Street, down the winding queue of Space Mountain, and even during fireworks, where he'd zoom in too far on the exploding lights, making them look like blurry suns. Sometimes the footage was shaky, sometimes too dark, but it didn't matter. That was us, there. It was real. We'd pop the tape into the VCR and sit cross-legged on the carpet, still in our travel clothes, watching ourselves scream with laughter on Dumbo or wave at the camera with sticky hands full of cotton candy. There was always a timestamp in the corner, Tuesday, 3:42 p.m., and we'd try to remember exactly what we were thinking at that moment. Was this before the Haunted Mansion? Was that the day I lost my hat on the People Mover? The camcorder had captured it all. Our mom singing along to the Tiki Room, our little sister falling asleep during the parade, slumped over in a stroller, my brother pretending to sword fight with a glow stick near Cinderella's castle. All of it, eternalized in grainy analog magic. We rewatched those tapes over and over, not just that week, but for years afterward. Every Christmas, every rainy day, every time someone needed cheering up. The rewinding sound became a familiar comfort. Sometimes the tape would snag or the screen would go fuzzy, but that just added to its charm. These weren't polished videos. They weren't edited montages with background music. They were raw, honest, messy moments captured with love. Even the sound of the camcorder buttons, the click when it turned on, the soft whir of the tape inside, became part of the memory. I used to sit with the remote in hand, pausing on certain frames. There I was, smiling in front of the Epcot fountain. There we were, sitting on the curb, waiting for spectral magic. It wasn't just nostalgia. It was proof that magic had touched us, that we had been inside something bigger, something beautiful. There was always that one part of the tape I couldn't watch without crying, the final night, just before we left. Dad had filmed the castle from across the hub, its lights twinkling in the dark. You could hear the faint sound of fireworks in the distance, and then his voice, soft and a little wistful, saying something like, "One last look." The camera lingered on the castle as people walked by, unaware they were stepping into someone else's goodbye. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can picture that moment perfectly. Back at home, the souvenirs took on a second life. The Mickey soap bar, never used. The pressed pennies lined up in a small display. The plushies tucked into bed beside us. Every item became a thread back to the parks, each holding a memory we didn't want to fade. Even the shopping bags, those crinkly, colorful plastic ones with character prints, were never thrown away. They held school lunches, comic books, or were repurposed as storage bags. But to us, they were treasures, reminders that for one golden week, we had lived inside a fairy tale. Eventually, the seasons changed. School took over. Life moved forward. But the tape stayed on the shelf and the memories stayed in our hearts. That sadness on the ride back home wasn't just about leaving a theme park. It was the ache of leaving behind a version of ourselves, one unburdened by deadlines or worry, one completely immersed in joy, one who still believed that magic lived in fireworks and parades and Mickey shaped everything. And maybe that's why, even now, decades later, I still find myself reaching for those memories. Not just for what they were, but for what they meant. For the proof that even in a world without apps, without screens, without filters, we could find happiness in a paper map, a VHS tape, and a moment shared with family under the Florida sky. Because the real magic wasn't just at Disney. It was in the way we held on to it long after we left.